Hey everyone, I'm not Kim Brasser. I'm Joseph, and I have the incredible pleasure and honor to be able to open up season two of the One Voice Evolving podcast with my good friend, Kim Brasser. And so I wanted to kick this off with just sharing my role in all of this. Kim reached out to me in, I want to say, March or April timeframe of this year, and she shared her passion project with me and what she saw as her vision. And she said, would you accompany me with this? So I've been helping her in producing, these podcasts for y'all to learn and to grow and to communicate and to have community. And it's been incredible to witness her and her growth. And actually, it's not easy to start a podcast, and she's done absolutely incredible. So, with that being said, I want to have a conversation with her that really starts to peek back into the season, her greatest learnings, some of the nuggets that she's gotten from the guests, and what she sees for season two for all of you. So thank you for allowing me to be here. Without further ado, let's talk to my friend Kim.
And here she is, Kim. Isn't this funny, right? The tides have turned, and I get to be kind of in your seat, but I don't want to be in your seat. I want to be in a conversation, and getting to explore, all the beautiful things that I mentioned in the intro. First of all, I just want to thank you for inviting me to have this conversation with and I mentioned in the introduction that when we met at Flow Group, that was what 6.5 years ago. It's so beautiful, right, to see how things evolve in our individual lives and how we've come together. And when you gave me an invitation earlier in the year, and I don't know what it was, but we've talked about getting a full body yes, right?
Uh-huh.
It was
Yeah.
a full body yes. And so
I
it's
love that.
been an honor to come along and witness you in your journey and to see it just come to fruition. So I want to start with, of course, you know, taking a look back to the idea and, the intention. I want to start this podcast. And 25 episodes later, after completing, right, the full season, and girl, you know that that's not easy, right?
Right.
We share statistics. What was it about podcasts? What was it that
So it
you have
was
found?
that most podcasters don't make it past 3 episodes. If I had known that in the beginning, it would have intimidated me. And
Oh,
then I found out that if you make it past 20, you're in the
uh-huh.
top 1%. And I didn't learn that until we were at 25. So I was like, well, dang, we must be doing something right. But Joseph, I have to say that I appreciate you so much because without you and your energy and your investment and your absolute flow and flexibility, we wouldn't have made it past 3 podcasts if I were on
Oh,
my own. Thank you so much.
yeah, I receive it. It's been a joy and a pleasure. And there are times where it was blind leading the blind. We're like, we'll get through it, right? And yeah, it's okay to be proud of ourselves, right?
Yeah,
And
this is a big deal.
what has come to fruition, and especially in this time in our lives, right? I appreciate how you have focused on, white women over 50. And that's just one segment of what you're doing. I know you're going to be sharing with us how the vision for One Voice evolving, going forward. But it's been fascinating, to see. And as we looked at your analytics, right, and seeing who's watching, who's coming, we're
Mhm.
starting to learn a lot. And there are a lot of people who are resonating. And, that's the thing. So when you look at when you started, 25 episodes later, what's the
Yep.
story that's emerging from, wow, this is what started, here's
Mhm.
where I am, right? Just narrate it for us.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to take you back a few months before we started the podcast because the
Mhm.
reason we started the podcast is because as a white woman who's been doing business online since 2010, I have always been able to run ads, fill groups, do my thing without intervention. But when I stepped into the racial equity, advancing racial equity venue, I
Mhm.
got throttled. on
Yeah.
Facebook and Instagram and everywhere. And not only that, but when I tried to just run a little ad to say, oh, look, I have a page, I had to jump through more hoops than I've ever seen because they considered social justice to be a political issue. And I had my first little taste of what Black creators must experience trying to be seen and heard in this space. And
Wow.
I was pissed
Yeah.
because that's how I am. I've come from corporate background, human resources, and I'm a white woman and I get to have my voice and my independence. And so I spent 3 months trying to navigate or bypass or find the platform or whatever. And it finally occurred to me the only way I am not going to be censored is to get in front of a microphone off of a platform that cares what we say.
Right.
And that's how this was born. So that's what
Right.
prompted me because I don't say things right and I don't have all the right jargon and I'm learning minute by minute. And I was so new to the racial equity space that there were people I was learning from, but I wanted to go behind the curtain of what they wrote in their book and see what their lived experience was in DEI spaces. And
Yeah.
we started this before DEI became a really bad word, before it became a slur and in the political cycle. So our original for season 1 was reclaiming joy in DEI spaces, and I was focusing on white women mostly
Right.
and some Black women who had been working in this space, had burned out, or what lessons learned going forward. What could we learn? And it was wonderful. And I learned that the most gracious instructors I could find were Black women creatives because they allowed me to stumble and they called me in but didn't call me out. And I learned faster than I ever would have learned on my own or than I had been able to learn in the 3 years prior. So One Voice Evolving started out as being my one voice evolving. My
Oh.
one voice. That's how we started this. And I always have evolved out loud and said, come along with me if you want to, but I'm really doing this for me. It's my 12-step background.
Yeah.
And then as the political cycle happened, and for the first time in my life, I got involved in politics because the personal is political when you're talking about racial equity in this time
Right.
frame. And when that happened, then it became one collective voice evolving.
Mhm.
And so
Yes.
now, and I'm not going to get too far ahead, but now that we're 25 in, the shift has come because I have become more confident and bolder and braver and
Yes.
asking people that I used to think were a couple, 3 levels above me. And I
Right.
would feel so excited and surprised when they said yes, that
Yeah.
now if I read one book or I hear one speaker that I think has a thread that we can pull from to evolve our collective voice,
Hmm.
then I just tell them who we are and ask them, and they can't jump on fast enough.
I love it.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
joy
It,
to have these talks.
there's an important distinction I want to bring forth about you've gotten more confident, you have gotten more bold, more, that type of thing. And for those who, get to watch and learn and engage with you, Kim, it's an important distinction because it's not just a podcast. I love that you gave us the insight to know it's one voice, Kim Brasser, evolving, expressed fully, and evolved into one collective voice, evolving together, right? So that's beautiful. And, it's the distinction being that, yeah, I'm starting out on this for me, right? To fulfill, etc. And then all the things that came along the way that kind of maybe could have stopped you, right? What
Yeah.
were those moments where you're like, what did I bite off? What the heck did I get it? I'm not sure if it was a comment in one of your videos. I don't know. Talk about that. Do you remember that? You remember the
Oh,
comment? Do you remember there was a comment that came early on and it wasn't favorable, and
Oh, oh,
you responded, so like, what's happening? I want you to share that because that's real, raw, and I think it will be relatable for people who want to speak up, who want to participate, who want to have a voice. So please share. Yeah.
when I started, I was so afraid of trolls. I was so afraid of
Sorry.
haters. I was
Yeah.
so afraid of rocking the boat, as a perfect white woman in a perfect white, corporate world.
Yeah.
Be still, be quiet, and don't make waves. Be nice, smile, do blah blah blah. And I remember it was a YouTube, one of the early YouTube videos we did, and I got my first hater, and I had to decide what am I going to do with these people? Because yeah, it threw me. It made me want to back right up and say, I live in a white bubble. And I have every privilege to step away from this fight at any given moment, and nobody ever has to know, my life does not have to be affected, but my Black and brown sisters and my children and my grandchildren, because we are a multifaceted, multiracial family now
Yeah.
combined, they don't have that privilege. And I choose intentionally every day to stay in the fight and not go back into my quiet comfort zone. But when that hater came out, I remember talking to you about that because it threw me, and I was like, do I block them? Do I remove their comments? And we shifted it. It was because we had retitled. We had retitled one of the podcast episodes into something contentious, potentially contentious.
Oh,
And people were
yes.
not even watching the video. These
Uh-huh.
trolls were catching the headline
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and making all kind of crappy,
yeah,
nasty assumptions.
right.
That's what it was. And I'm
Yeah,
like, okay, so we need to shift so that people listen a little before they decide to do that. But the
right.
other thing I did was I said, I probably am going to need to buffer because my ego is too sensitive right now to take on
Hmm.
haters and everything else
Right.
that is so new and risky. But I
Hmm.
couldn't find somebody to do that. And so I used Chat GPT. I used artificial intelligence to say, here's our mission at One Voice Evolving. Here's the comment I got. How do I respond
Really?
to this in on brand? Because I wanted to say something really nasty and start a war. And
Yeah.
Chat GPT gave me the verbiage and gave me the buffer I needed. So now, if ever, and we haven't had any more troll problems, or else they haven't been a problem for me because I felt more confident and more secure
Right.
that I could
Yeah.
keep that crap away
Right.
from my headspace and still keep
Yeah.
doing the thing I need to do. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
1,000%. It was probably the troll was probably sent by the podcast demons. He's like, "Oh, this is episode 3."
Probably, it probably because it was about episode 3,
I
actually.
think it was early on, and I
It
was like,
was,
"Oh, oh, okay." And so,
yeah.
okay, you passed the test. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Oh my
awesome.
gosh.
So, I just wanted to highlight that what happens is that many of us have this vision inside of us that we want to bring forth somehow, you know, and we want to make it to come to life. We're not quite sure. We know we have that deep desire, and then it's the little, stumbles along the way that can either constrain us or propel us.
Right.
And you were propelled because as it evolved,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Start talking about what you started to discover kind of in the fifth, sixth, seventh episode, where I started to notice your conversation is getting really deeper. I mean,
Yeah.
that type of thing. So, share that evolving
So
experience.
once I decided I wasn't going to quit, which was after episode 3,
Right.
then I thought, okay, this is for my growth. So I'm back the curtain, which means I have to show them how. I have to
Yes.
show when I get a speaker, the speakers I've had on have been in, God, such intelligent, passionate,
Yeah.
educated people that my experience in education pales in comparison, especially my experience.
Yeah.
And but all of us, all we professional women can put up a slide deck and we can roll through our signature speech day
Mhm.
in, day out, hour after hour without thinking about it. And that's not what I wanted for my audience. And that's not what I
Mhm.
want for myself. I
Yeah.
want to go deep, and I
Mhm.
have the ability because people either love me or they hate me. And fortunately, our guests have pretty much, I've been able to find a place there for that
Yeah.
to occur. And
Right.
so I'm able to ask a question that they hadn't thought of before that will catch them not off guard, but allow them to tell some of their personal story in this DEI challenging space or this political challenging time.
Mhm.
And those are the nuggets that I grow from. I
Mm.
don't want to know the textbook. I can read a book. I want to know what it's like to live the experience that caused you to write the book.
Right.
Now
Yeah.
it matters.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. Well, I want to shift a little bit to your guests actually,
Yes.
because they really brought a wide range of perspectives like to the table as it relates to racial equity, bringing, returning joy to the DEI spaces that began to evolve. And there was one pivotal moment in the season where you realized this is political. We got to bring politics, right? Was
Do
there
you
a
remember?
story or a moment from any of your guests that left you changed after the conversation ended?
Oh my gosh. So I remember two or three in a row that
Hmm.
shifted me. One
Yeah.
of them, one of them was somebody that you recommended, who did somatic healing work.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that one,
Tara Petrick. Hmm.
Tara, yes. And she was amazing, but it broke me open in a way I didn't know was there. So there
Hmm.
was a physical shift from that. And right after that, I had Melody LeBaron on,
Those were
who
back to back. I didn't
those
realize.
were back, those
Okay.
were back to
Now
back.
that now that I know Melody a little bit more. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
I
And
get
there
it.
was Melody who was talking about, we even talked about grief back then, but she was more, she was more yoga, she was more new age. And on the heels of the somatic shift, my heart was open to hear that a little differently.
Sure.
And right after that was my 82-year-old guest. She was the
Oh,
one.
wow.
She
I
was the
remember
one that
those.
broke it. It just broke it. After that, it was like my idea of who the best guest is, I have no idea.
Right.
I
What would
know
you?
that they rolled through in exactly the order they needed to for my
Yeah.
best good.
So give us a few of the nuggets from those because I look at, the somatic pieces of it, right?
Mhm.
Which is
Yeah,
really getting in tune with our body, regulating our nervous system and all those types of things. And I
right.
don't think, oh no, a lot of people realize that in the grief and in traumatic experiences to already,
Yes. Yeah.
and when you combine those two, oh,
Mhm.
it it
Right.
does a lot of the work of dismantling the things that are so rigid in us,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah.
that we can have kind of a heart of flesh per se to say,
Mhm.
okay, we're going to come to the table not with fist up, but more palms up,
Right. Right.
right? So I think that type of integration, with Melody and Tara and how old was she? She was 82,
Uh,
was she? Um,
82 years
yeah,
old,
82.
living
Beautiful.
in Costa Rica. What a
Yeah,
gift.
yeah, that is awesome. So, what were a couple of the nuggets that you say were
Sure.
so profound for you?
So Tara came right on the heels of my hater panic. That's where she landed.
Wow, look at
And
that.
that's why
Yeah.
I think that's why you recommended her when you did, because you're like,
Oh,
oh,
you're right.
yeah. And
Yeah,
so
you're right.
we took my trauma and my rule making about how to move in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of allowing me to reason or rationalize it away, her thing was to just sit longer. The more it triggers you, the longer you just sink into it. and let it have its voice was a good reminder, but it was also, we worked through in that session the voice of trauma about not about haters, about
Yeah.
being criticized,
Right.
about my
Yeah.
defensiveness at
Yeah.
critique and my protections.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and on the heels of that, it and her, God, she is a gentle soul and a guiding force to be
Mhm.
reckoned with. That's what
Absolutely.
I will say
Yeah.
about Tara.
Yeah.
She was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. That's all
Yeah.
right. Wonderful.
And then oh, go ahead.
No, please, please.
Well, and then Melody came behind that, and we grieved the things that got uncovered in the somatic healing. She took me through a little bit of her process of how to, she gave me like 3 pointers of how to engage grief. Now, I know intellectually and through all of my therapy of a lifetime about the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I can intellectualize it, I can teach it, I can
Mhm.
check my body to see where I am. But I don't like to sit in the body in the moment when it's feeling the feelings. That's my
Mhm.
least favorite thing to do.
Right.
I like to talk about it after it's over so you don't see me ugly cry.
Yes.
And what changed after that is I
Yeah.
stopped worrying about that. And that, we did that little 5 series political grief one, the post-election
Yeah.
grief series. And one of those was 2 minutes and it got the biggest
I
views.
know.
And I was raging in that one.
Right. Okay. Which brings me to,
Yeah.
kind of what you brought it to me actually in the very beginning. And you wrote it down. I said, write some thoughts down around, what do you want to create? What is the space, going to container want to be? And you said 3 words: real, raw, relatable.
Yeah.
I want to know, why was that important to kind of encompass the space?
It was important because DEI in my culprit, scratch that. DEI in my corporate background was oftentimes a box to be checked by the companies so they could keep their federal contract or so they could look like. And after George Floyd in 2020, you saw all these companies get on the BLM bandwagon only to fall off as soon as nobody was watching. And now you've seen them do the same thing with DEI. But DEI, the other thing was that I was dealing with a lot of people who were just brilliant and had worked so hard to make changes in corporate culture and were burned out because they couldn't get buy-in from the C-suite.
Right.
They want you to do all the work, all the labor, and check the box, but they don't want to change the structure that causes the problem that gives you a
Hmm.
box you need to check.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted for the women I was bringing on to speak, I wanted them to have a safe container as our guests
Yeah.
where they could talk about the reality of what it's like to work in those spaces. Where did you misstep? Where did you this? They too have a heart for change. They still have a heart for change, but they're exhausted and there's nobody to hand it off to. People from our generation, there aren't as many to hand it off to as there would have been 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
it's now a legacy factor and it's legacy building, but I don't want it to be an academic pursuit. And that's why raw, real, and relatable, because
Mhm.
with those as my values, and when I speak those values, from the time I start to talk to them about booking till the time we're finished, that's the guiding light of every episode.
I love it.
Find the nugget. I don't care if
Yeah.
you only take one
Find the
nugget,
nuggets.
find the nugget.
Yeah. Okay, so we're embarking and getting to look at season 2 coming up, and
Yeah.
I know there are some things that have been already.
Okay, your sound is out. Your sound's going
Is
out.
it? Can you hear
Yeah.
me now? Is
Yep.
that better?
Yep.
Okay. I was speaking about season 2, right?
Mhm.
And looking forward, because so much has emerged, especially after and during the election cycle.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that you realize experience, which has kind of been launching that point, into what your vision is for this coming season, in the guests that you already have lined up, and it's really exciting. So I really want you to share from the heart. What is season two? What's the voice evolving?
So
Right.
the voice, my word for season 2 is resilience.
Mm,
While
okay.
everybody else is trying to figure out, what do we do now? What do we do next? Do we hide? Do we fight? Do we resist? If you can't beat them, join them. What do we do? I started looking at resilience. There was a book I read a long time ago called The Survivor Personality. And in this book, the premise was, these are the things that survivors have that other people don't have. And the male who wrote that book imagined that he could checkbox somebody through it and you could learn to have a survivor personality. Me, as a survivor of multiple traumas during my life, said, no, you only learn that stuff by living through it. You
That's
only learn
right.
that by
Right. Yeah.
doing. And I used to think I could teach people to do what I did or see what I saw or know what I know. And I learned, 20 years ago that there is a unique way. It's my neurodivergence, or it's my gifting from the higher power, or it is my experience and my always having a plan B model that allows me to see 5 layers beneath what somebody's presenting.
Mm.
And that's the
I'm
part I don't go 5
you know what?
layers deep with anybody,
Yeah.
but I'll go 1 deep. It's a share, check, share. I'll go 1 deep and see if you can handle that, and then we might take another
Yeah.
layer off.
Right.
But
Yeah. No, as you describe that, I can see that like now, and knowing you in these years in the conversations, it's discernment really
yeah,
too, right? And it's the idea that this is one of my favorite quotes, and I don't even want to call it a quote. It kind of diminishes it, but it's the idea that we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are.
yes.
And so the idea, I think at least what I gleaned is the inspection in and the honoring of, the grief, right? The inward part of this work, right? And so as you look to season two, what are the things that what are emerging as, I don't want to say topics per se, but what are some things that are coming where it's like, I'm addressing this is what's in my field. Yeah,
Oh,
share about that.
absolutely. So I've got all of 2025. I see this thread that's running on a daily basis with every conversation into where this is heading. So I can give you a sort of a layout even.
Wow. Okay.
But one of the things that has always been true about me is that I'm not a academic researcher, but
Hmm.
I am absolutely a lifelong learner. And I was wired to tell people secrets. I was born to put the elephant on the table in the most uncomfortable situations and say, we're going to smell this shit together. We're not going to walk around it. We're not going to pretend it doesn't exist. We're going to put it up here so we can figure out collectively, what are we going to do with this? I have
Yeah.
always done that.
Right.
And what happened as I began to get involved in racial equity, and I have to say, I also have ADHD, undiagnosed, only because my adult children have been diagnosed and they've said, Mom, you're 100%. Okay. All right. Well, I'm old and I've managed it. So here you go. Sort of. But, and I just lost my train of thought. You're going to have to block this one out.
80,
Ah,
2 peas in a pod.
oh my God. And this is why it takes us 4 days to do it. Podcast edit. Shit.
This is real. This is raw.
This is.
And if you're doing any type of work like this, I'm sure it's relatable.
Oh man. Yeah. Yeah. So I
Yeah. No,
completely forgot what I was talking
no,
about.
well, you're creating this, it's like It's expression, and I think it's an important part of this type of work. It's very personal, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And as because you have it, in here, you showed me a few of the from the first, couple of guests that we have coming on.
Mhm. Oh, I know.
Excited, and you have your first male guest, right?
Oh,
Coming
yes.
up,
Yeah, I
and
do.
I think he's a U.S. veteran, is what
He
it is.
is.
I'm really looking forward to diving
He is raw, real, relatable, and
later.
uncensored. That one.
Oh, okay,
There's no,
yeah,
no, we're not gonna manage anything that
right,
comes out of his mouth. It
yeah.
was
Now,
awesome.
is there a theme by chance? Is a theme emerged other than I know your resilience is kind of
Yeah.
the word, but is there anything as it relates to one voice evolving? Because I know that you are looking to expand as it relates to some apparel merchandise to support the cause around colorblind.
Yep.
Is that something that you wanted to would like to talk about?
Yeah. So let's kind of finish that. So out of season one actually came Colorblind is Still Blind. I was talking at one of the podcasts we did. I was doing a podcast with a Black creator, I think. And I said, we as white people of a certain age were taught that the best anti-racial thing to be was colorblind. And we prided ourselves on, I don't see color, I treat everybody the same, blah, 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 not understanding the difference between equality and equity.
Right.
And now, of course, it's being used as an excuse to be racist. I'm sorry, it just is. And so it doesn't come across the same as it did 30 years ago to be colorblind. And so I said, the problem with colorblind is it's still blind. If I'm colorblind, then I'm not seeing the particular things that that you encounter that are different than the things I encounter, and that you need a different accommodation simply because of the way the brush you get painted with when people see your skin color versus the privilege I have because when people see mine, it is assumed. And in fact, I just talked to somebody, upcoming guest, who said that she's going to an HBCU. She's for her a graduate program, a
Hmm.
PhD, I think. And she is a white woman in an HBCU. And when she goes into the local stores, they assume that she is there as a paying customer to buy. But when of her classmates who are Black go into the same local store, the assumption is that you have to watch them because they might be there to steal from you for no reason but the color of their skin. So there's a reality that colorblind is still blind. And my son pulled that out, said, Mom, I've never heard that term before. Have you ever? Where did you get that? And I said, it came out of my mouth. I don't think I've ever seen it. He did a search. It's not anywhere. He created the graphic, and now I have merch for season
Yeah,
two.
right. And so here the adage is colorblind is still blind,
Yeah. Yeah. This
right?
is not
And
something to assume.
so and yeah, that's cool
And
exploration.
resilience redefined is what I have for season two. Whether we change the DEI information on the podcast or whether we don't, those are my marching orders. And so back to the neurodivergent part of my brain. So
Hmm.
I've always been this one for when I was a child. My mother was late. I was a late in life child, last of five. And she
Hmm.
was 38 when I was born. And by
Mm.
the time I was 4, and she lied about her age. She was 38 and she didn't want anybody to know because back then that was a really old mom, right? And so all my other friends had 20-something-year-old mothers and she was 38. And whenever anybody came to our door, and back then we had milkmen and we had newspaper people and we had postmen and we had everybody. Whenever anybody came to the door, I ran to beat her at 4 years old to the door, open the door, always a man. First thing I would say is, do you want to know how old my mom is? My mom's 42. She hated that. She hated that. It drove her crazy. I swear, it wasn't until I was probably 14 and went snooping because I was sure I was adopted by then because I didn't have a lot in common with this family I was growing up in, that I found out what her actual birth date was and how old she really was, right? And I probably told everybody then too. So right before season 2, I live in nowhere, New Hampshire, and I moved here from first Las Vegas through Spokane, Washington to here.
Mhm.
And I moved right before the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened and I got sequestered. So I never put roots or got to know anybody. And there was this historian coming to Claremont, and the topic of her title of her talk was Hidden History.
Hmm.
Well, my 12-step background says you're only as sick as your secrets. And I know from my work that that we break shame by breaking silence. So shame is given to us in community, and we can't break it unless we break it out loud, unless we speak it and we break the shame that way. I felt the same draw to go to that as I felt to go to Dr. Nikki Lanier's workshop a year ago. And that was that I have to be there. I don't know why. I just have to be there.
It's the yes, right? It's a sacred body.
It
Yes, I'm
had
supposed to
to.
go. Yeah.
I don't want to do anything in this little redneck community, but I went. And she is one of our upcoming guests. She was amazing. But it turns out that this little town I live in was a hub of the Underground Railroad before the Civil War, moving freedom seekers who were slave
Wow.
freedom seekers from the South to
Mhm.
Canada. And there was this entire network all the way through the country. And the network, this gives me goosebumps. This is where we're headed. And here's why. Because as we're after this election cycle, I'm like, there are some lessons to be learned and some parallels between how they made that successful and secret all throughout the Civil War to move people to
Wow.
safety at a time when my very relatives could be at risk and I might need to figure out how to move people to safety. There's there's a lot of ways to resist. And so that became a little driving point for me to say, so I need to learn more because not only that, and then of course, the next thing that happened, New England. New England is so white, it's ridiculous. But they're very proud of their abolitionist history, except that the state I'm in, and I'm in the state of New Hampshire, erased all of it from their
Really?
they erased from all of their government
Really?
documents, from everything, 100 years of slavery, any slavery records or any abolitionist records, completely removed. Right? So this historian has been going and getting old documents. I mean, these towns were before the Revolutionary War. This is a part of the country that's really old. Our town was before 1776. And there are documents still being uncovered today from doctors in the Civil War who were held in Florida as prisoners of war and still have their documents and their things. So the history, the hidden history, I
Yeah.
love putting that stuff on the table. Love
Well,
it.
yeah. I mean, I think that we see that pretty widely in so many areas in the world. In other words, exposure,
Yes.
right? Truths being surfaced. I think there's this collective we are experiencing, whether it be personal,
Mhm.
in business, and in institutions and systems, we're seeing it all being whoa. So congratulations. And,
Yes.
wow. Yeah, I'm excited for this season. And
It's
of
so
course,
good.
we're going to be, you'll be facing the things that, that evolve in and come and face you to challenge you even more and
Yep.
continue, with this work is so incredible. This is a powerful platform. So I want to, guys, we could talk for a long time, Kim, and I know the intention of this is to really sit here and have a conversation and say, let's pull some nuggets out.
Yeah.
This is hard work. And as we celebrate, you're a part of the 1% of the podcasters out there, you know? Yeah.
Fun.
Let's like, I think I just fuck around and do season 2 and see what happens when my heart leads me, right? The passion that I have inside me, I keep it real, raw, and relatable, right? I keep my body like, in tune. I watch the grief, I watch the voices, but I move forward, especially in very like uncertain times.
Mhm. Yeah.
So with that platform, and as we chalk up episode 1 of season 2, I want to ask you, what seed would you like to plant in your listeners, hearts and minds of
Mhm.
change
Mhm.
as we enter in 2025, in the space in which you are bringing forth in One Voice Evolving? What seed would you like to plant with them? A seed of change.
That you can't transmit what you don't have. And so the first thing that a listener needs to do is be willing to do the work within them to uncover and eliminate their own biases. You have to understand it's not a 2-week program. It's not a 2-year thing. I've spent more than 60 years smothered in it, living in the comfort of it. And I'm never going to be finished learning, growing out of it because it's everywhere. It's in my DNA. It's in my generational trauma. It's in everything. So the first thing I want them to do is to understand that it begins with you, and you don't have to make a grand gesture to make a change. We make a
Right.
change by dropping a pebble in the water in your home, in your business, in your community, and
Mm,
let that ripple play out. You
thousand
think
percent,
your voice doesn't matter, and one voice is all it takes.
1,000%. And in the power of that. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And once again, appreciate the opportunity to come and chat with you about such a beautiful passion project that I'm sure has just surpassed what you thought was like, above and beyond what you can think or imagine, because I've been a witness to you.
Mm.
So, the conversations of like, what is happening? And acknowledging our own individual, not shortcomings, but we're just not strong in certain areas, and saying we're going to move forward. We'll make it work.
Mhm.
Yeah. Anyhow, honored to be here with you, and congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I, Joseph, I don't want to do this without you. So you're stuck with
Oh,
me. You're just stuck here.
all
It
right.
You make it fun. You're part of the joy of the thing. So thank you
Uh,
so much.
Thank you for so much. And for those of you who are watching us today, give us a like, subscribe, and share. Sometimes we're not that type of but yeah, we want this to be a place where people can feel safe, challenged, and a place to say, I have people, myself, this is not just a thing about, it's not about racism only, you know, this is about your voice,
Yes.
So come join Kim and help us to grow in this season. All right. Until then, thank you for joining us. See y'all later. Take care. Bye. So we ended and we're back.
Because I asked if I could tell him the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So,
And I said, should we capture this? Let's do it. Yeah.
so
Okay.
the rest of the story, and the reason why this is so exciting for me is because I see the hand of God in it. All I have to do is show up and I watch the thread. We ditched all the family gatherings this year for Thanksgiving, and my husband and I went off to a little inn in Vermont that we've never been to because it was COVID and then, all the things. And it's a historical inn. And while we were waiting for our reservation, having a drink at the bar, the bartender happened to be the new owner who bought it in 2022, who was telling us the history of this beautiful, built in 1774 home, right?
Wow.
And he's from Bulgaria. He and his brother bought it. They're from Bulgaria. And he didn't know the history. And so a gentleman from 2 miles down the road who knew the family who originally owned it, they were farmers and their families knew each other, came and gave him some history on the place. And then he had a friend in Springfield, Vermont, who came and gave him more history. So he was telling us all the history of this inn. And this part was added in 1830 and this part here. And I'm looking at this whole layout and I'm thinking, great place to have a women's retreat, because I was thinking about having a grief women's retreat after my podcast with Melody.
Right.
And I said to him, have you ever done any research on the Underground Railroad? Because, there were hubs. Land like this would have been a hub along the way to Canada. And it turns out that Claremont was a hub that nobody knew about because the history
Oh.
was erased. We had our own
Wow.
little relay station here. And he had never heard of the Underground Railroad. He didn't know what it was. And I went, well, isn't that interesting? So we ended up, we had lots of conversation. But when I came home, I had on my books to go have lunch with that historian person. I had lunch with her yesterday.
Oh,
But
wow.
she was on the book. So I messaged her and said, in your history, she's written books about the hidden history of New England. In your history, have you ever heard of this place? And the guy who owned it, the family who owned it. Why, yes, she had. Turns out the guy who owned it, who was, if you look at the history on Wikipedia, he was a senator, he was a judge, his family were
Wow.
farmers, blah, 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 blah. But the hidden history, he was an Underground Railroad agent. That was a hub, that building that these people are trying to turn into a Michelin 5-star chef resort. And she has written about the property, but she didn't know. And then she connected it to a family in Springfield, Vermont. Guess what? Same family that came and talked to him about the history of the place. So they gave him the history of the farm, but they didn't give him, either because they didn't have it or they didn't give it, the Underground Railroad history connection to that property. Blew me away.
Fascinating.
So yesterday I go and have lunch with her. And we're talking about the podcast episode we're about to do with her. And I'm telling her about this thread, and she brings me, I should send it to you to put up here. So she has been called in to catalog things from a family farm in Vermont, 2 family houses where the sole surviving son just passed. And so everything is being cataloged from the early 1700s. And she came across this coin. And back in abolitionist days, there was a coin that said, with a slave on it, a male slave, that said, "Am I not a man? Am I not your brother?" And it was a promotional coin. Well, in her cataloging, she found a coin with a woman in chains on it. That's gonna make me cry. That said, "Am I not a woman? Am I not your sister?"
Wow.
And of all the things this woman has not done is take the female thread of the abolitionist movement through New England, through the Underground Railroad. It was the women who influenced the men to make the shift. Hello, resilience.
Wow.
But history
That's
was not
great.
a thing, but history is. And so every time you go into history of the Underground Railroad, you get the men, the men, the men, the slave owners, slave owners, slave owners, because the women didn't have a voice. But
No. Yeah.
I believe with my whole heart
Yeah.
that the reason why this calls to me so much is because women in that time frame and in today are a minority voice with fewer rights than the men. Just ask them. And during slavery, times of slavery, women would have had a heart for that because they lived the experience of that. And so all the work they did, it's just like Hidden Figures, the movie. All the work they did got credited to the influential men and
Yes.
hidden.
That, I mean, come on, Kim. You can't make this shit up.
No, nope, nope. So I have no
Cannot.
idea where this is going to
Okay.
go in this season, but it's going to be fun to see.
So